Hi, this is Greg Kilstrom. Welcome to Season 3 of the Agile World, where we discuss customer and employee experience, organizational and workforce transformation, and how business can adapt and continually improve in an agile age. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed in this show, you can go to my website at theagile.world and read my latest articles, or get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kilstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile World podcast. Today we're going to talk about adaptivity, resilience, and how to thrive in a post-pandemic world. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Ira Wolfe, President and Chief Googlization Officer at Success Performance Solutions, author of several books including Recruiting in the Age of Googlization, and host of the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show. Ira, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Greg, very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Well, yeah, looking forward to talking with you. So first, before we get into too much here, since you use this term in your title and your show, what is Googlization, and can you describe your role of Chief Googlization Officer?
Absolutely. And it's no surprise. I get that question a lot. And the definition has really evolved. I'll go with the current definition and then give you a real brief history of how it got there. But it simply means the convergence of people, technology, and business. That's all it is. And we're certainly living in a world where, especially through 2020, that businesses are reliant on both people and technology, and the lines are blurring a little bit, and they were blurring a little bit even earlier than that, and they will continue to blur because we're talking about people relying on technology more, and not only using technology, but almost becoming one with technology. The line I wrote in my book that the lines between science fiction and reality are blurring, and it's definitely true. The origin of it is, and you mentioned my podcast is Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization. I wrote a book in about 2008, and it was about the four generations in the workplace at the time. It was about the oldest generation, the veterans, and then the baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials. And I was originally going to call it The Wired, the Tired, and Technology, and talk about it's not only the four generations that had differences, but each generation grew up using technology or lack of technology, and how it shaped their lives. And I think and people continue to ignore the impact technology was having on each of these generations. And then somewhere I don't know where it came up, but the term obviously Google was not in its infancy, but it was starting to grow, and I
Right.
quickly. Somebody used something like an ization of something, whatever it was. And I go, wow, Googlization, that sounds good. So I changed the title because it alliterated. It was good marketing, and it stuck, and it was Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization rather than Wired, Tired, and Technology. So that's
Nice.
what it means. And, we could talk in 3 or 4 years from now, and it'll probably continue to evolve.
Yeah. Well, this podcast is called The Agile World for a reason, and I know you talk a lot about adaptivity and agility in your own ways. Talk to me about how you look at flexibility, resilience, and being robust, and how you think companies and individuals should view it.
No, absolutely. And I love talking about that. And it's something that sort of coalesced in 2020, 2019, because so many people were talking about all the different aspects of what we needed to do, what businesses and people needed to do to grow and to survive and to grow. And I got turned on to the adaptability quotient of measuring how this happens. And part of that was grit, resilience, mental flexibility, mindset, and unlearning. And we can go into that a little bit more. But going back to your specific question, uh, I was. I kept seeing these terms such as flexibility and agility and resilience and robustness being thrown around, and people sort of used them interchangeably while they weren't. So I took a deep dive did a lot of reading, listened to people, talked to a couple thought leaders on it, and I honestly, and I know agility is certainly your expert. You're probably more of an expert in agility than I am, but it was sort of it was really lining that up because again, people were talking about if you have an agile organization, if you as an individual are agile, then that's what you need. So, real briefly,
Right.
flexibility is the ability to react to a disruption, a change. But the research pretty much says that flexibility is adjusting, reacting to a predicted events. We anticipated something happen, or we are something already happened, and we sort of we bend with it. But flexibility suggests that we adapt to whatever the environment brings. And that's certainly a good survival tool, but it doesn't necessarily help us grow because not all change is good. And then that means we're waiting to react rather than be proactive.
Right.
And that doesn't fit into innovation or other aspects. Agility is interesting because, and you could, this may be a whole conversation between you and me. Is agility is the definition that I landed on was the ability to react but to unpredictable circumstances. So, for instance, a pandemic. People debate whether it's predictable or unpredictable, but maybe the most unpredictable. The pandemic was predictable, but the response that we had as human beings was unpredictable. So, whatever it is,
Right.
uh,
Right.
but so flexibility was the ability to react to a predicted event. Agility was the ability to react to an unpredictable event. And when you and I first talked a few weeks ago, too, I think one of the other things that I tend to like is that flexibility may be more individual, where agile is more organizational. And again, I'd love to have a
Yeah.
deeper conversation about
Yeah.
that. But let's lead into resilience because resilience is the ability to survive after an impact or after a setback, to rebound. But it suggests that you go back to the original state that you were in before you can move forward. That doesn't mean that you don't rebound and then gather your being and your thoughts and your energy and your focus and you move on. But resilience was that ability to kind of bounce. You take another shape and then it goes
Yeah.
back to the original shape. Robustness was the ability to endure without adapting. Very subtle, but very interesting. So imagine that army tanker, that vehicle that blasts through. If you watch any movies, it
Yeah.
blasts through the enemy, it breaks down the wall, and no matter what anybody fires at it, it survives, but it didn't adapt. And that leads to the final thing because none of those really suggest what we need to do. There's a concept out there talked about anti-fragility, and it came from finance. People might be familiar with Nassim Taleb. Uh, he
Yeah.
he he was the one who came up with the black swan event, like 2008, and he said that was actually predictable to some sense. But what he
Yeah.
suggested was if our systems and our personalities and our behaviors are fragile, that they break under extreme stress or a severe impact, how do we what's the opposite of that? And so the opposite of fragile is anti-fragility. And what I like about his definition, and it may not be perfect, but it's a good path to think about, is that it's the ability not just to be resilient, not to just be agile, not to be just flexible, but with every setback, with every crisis, to become stronger, to learn from it, to become better, to become more
Yeah.
resistant, and in a sense, to become more agile, to become more flexible, to become more resilient. So so it sort of goes on a continuum of flexible of reacting, surviving, reacting, enduring, and growing stronger. And I think most
Mm.
people would suggest that they want to grow stronger, but it takes a different process. It's just not, oh, we're going to become more resilient, or hey, we always bounce back after every crisis.
Right.
That It's
Right.
going to get harder because the crises are more complicated.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's I like that you're teasing apart the different aspects of it. So yeah, we're definitely gonna have to have a follow up. I mean, if there's one thing I like talking about, it's agile. If there's another, it's semantics. So always happy to talk through that stuff. So, but I think it's good that that you're defining the different aspects because I think on this show we talk about. I think agile is an umbrella for a lot of those things that you're talking through, as someone is actually a practitioner in their field, they need to actually understand the distinction and the the semantic differences between those things. So that's great.
Yeah, and I think again, you're coming from agility. I was coming from adaptability because you talked about
Yeah,
adaptive, and we use
yeah,
the term adaptability. And adaptability was really all of these. And then I realized that adaptability in the way we're using it suggests that we're hoping people grow stronger, but that wasn't necessarily coming out of the individual components like grit, resilience, mental
yeah,
flexibility, mindset, and unlearning. So although all those combined really, and again, I don't want to get into the semantics. If you have all those and you're agile, great. If you have all those and you're adaptable, great. But if
yeah.
you're missing those components, it can't be that, no, I've always been pretty resilient and then stop there. That's not going to be enough going forward. It's not going to help you grow.
Yeah, yeah. Well, to go back to adaptability, you mentioned the adaptability quotient. Can you talk a little bit about that, and even on the individual level, how does that differ from emotional intelligence or other potential measurements and things like that?
So I'll start with, if people are familiar with IQ. So it's IQ, EQ, and now there's AQ. And AQ is just simply a new measurement for lack of a better word, a new normal, a normal 2.0, or as I often suggest, new waves of normal. Because again, I think normal or normal to new normal or normal 2.0 suggests like another era. And it's just going to be it's going to be predictable for the next 20 or 30 or 40 years. That's going to be
Right.
normal. And that's not going to be the case. So I think we're going to have waves of new normals. But
Yeah.
going, so we had IQ, and IQ measures how smart someone was. And there's a way to measure that. And it correlates with, it doesn't always correlate with performance, but there's correlations with life. And then
Right.
certainly in the 1990s, 2000s, Daniel Goleman wrote his book and popularized emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence was the ability is your self-awareness, how you manage your emotions, how you can recognize other people's emotions, and then what can you do to help other people manage their emotions. So that's emotional intelligence, and it's obviously a big part of what we do now is of leadership, of managing people, of being able to recognize how people react to us and how we can help them respond more effectively and behave differently amongst others. But
Yeah.
that again was still not enough because our world kept changing. So adaptability or AQ is really the measurement of our ability to respond to change. It's our change readiness. Uh,
Okay.
and what, but just labeling it doesn't help. Just like EQ and IQ have assessments or ways to measure that, to quantify how prepared somebody is. That's what AQ is. So the adaptability quotient that I work with was done through extensive research. It was a project over the last 5 years, 4 or 5 years, and it through through the likes of Singularity University, if anybody's familiar with them, certainly
Yeah.
at the forefront of change,
Yeah.
with IBM, with United Nations, with HSBC, the bank, and many, many others, and then a few universities. Mike Raven and Ross Thornley, who are colleagues of mine, pursued that, and they wanted to find, is there a way, two things, how can we accurately identify adaptability quotient, and I gave given you some of those things with
Yeah.
resilience, and then how can we measure it, how can we effectively measure it, not just to say, oh, you're smart, you got it, and you don't, but how could we measure it, and then the tool, the assessment itself, would help people change, would give them a blueprint of what they need to do differently. So, for instance, if they score in the 40th percentile on resilience compared to other people, what can they do to improve that? And if they improve it by only 10% or 15%, how differently would they behave when it comes to change?
Yeah.
So the adaptability quotient is both an assessment, it's a measurement, and it's also a tool that helps people grow.
Great. So in the research process for that, was there anything surprising, unexpected that came about through that? Since since it sounds like you were involved in that process.
Yeah, I was late to the party, but I'm certified and I'm part of the organization now. So I was not involved with the early research, but
Gotcha.
from reading through the research, the prizes were a few things. One was that there's actually 15 different dimensions, and we won't go in. We don't have time to go into all those, but
Sure, sure.
I mentioned five, but there were three general categories, and the acronym is ACE, and there were abilities, there was character, and there was the environment. And the recognition was that you're not adaptable just to who you are, and be, well, you are. It's because of who you are, but there were abilities, which is what I mentioned. There was
Yeah.
character, and character is what motivates you. Because people would be more, if they're motivated by circumstances or rewards or recognition, whatever it might be, they might be more likely to accept the change that's going on. But it was, what's your thinking style? What's your motivational style? Interesting enough, are you extroverted? Because it's not that extroversion was good or bad when it came to adaptability. It's but how do you engage? How do you engage with change? Because extroverts will talk it out and engage with other people. Introverts may try to process it themselves, and that could impact your ability to be agile or flexible or resilient, whatever it might be. But the one that was missing, the one that came up, was hope. Uh,
Hmm.
the more adaptable, the more hopeful someone is, the more positive they are about the future. Was had a high impact. Not, it wasn't the highest, but it had an impact on your ability to adapt, which was interesting. And that's sort of, we you would hope that hope would be part of
Hmm.
that.
Right,
Um,
right.
but it really did have a strong correlation with that. But then the other part was, and this is really important, is the organization has a significant impact on individuals' ability to adapt. And we've been talking about that for years.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
look at the Google, you look at the companies that innovate and the companies that stifle innovation. Uh, and it were things like company support and team support and emotional support. So think about through the 2020 year, there's companies that are surviving and doing well, and then you have these high unemployment rates and companies failing. And take out the hospitality and the transportation and and restaurants from that mix. But even within manufacturing and other distribution, other types of organizations, some are thriving and some are struggling within the same industries. And part of that is the companies that understood how to support, did the organization support the people within it and all the stakeholders, also the customers, not just the employees, local. So the people that you immediately surrounded yourself, your boss and your coworkers, did you feel you had team support? Was there, beyond the business aspect, was there emotional support? So the three categories were ability, character, and environment. And the thing that surprised us most was, one is the hope, but
yeah,
also the impact that company support and team support had on individuals, and growth and the ability to adapt. But again, the company, you can be in a great company, and if you have a lousy mindset, or if you're not open minded, or you rely on the team too much to keep picking you up, you get knocked down and they rally around you and pick you up. Eventually, people get tired of that. you
right,
know,
right,
that if you keep doing the same thing over and over again and become a codependent in the process. So it
right.
really is a mix of the 15 dimensions. One of the strongest predictors was, however, was actually resilience. That you have to be willing to at least survive. You have to have the edge to at least want to bounce back to the original shape. that won't be enough in the future because the environment has changed. But resilience was a really strong predictor within that. The other one was unlearning, and I think that's a huge key, piece.
Yeah.
We talk about learning is what do we need to learn? We need to we need to reskill and upskill. But the one thing that seems to get ignored, and it's a relatively new concept, is unlearning. And I use the analogy for those that at least understand what defragging a hard drive is. I'm sure most people at one time had to do that or heard that. Is
Yeah.
that when you or even if it's even living in an analog world, that your desk looks like it's just piles and piles of paper and you threw things in boxes. It's the end of the year tax receipts.
Right. Right.
And eventually you have to stop, you have to reorganize those. You put them in a neat little file, you create more room, and you get rid of the stuff you don't need. We need to do that. And when it comes to our skills, there are certain things that were good to know, but they're not relevant anymore. Some of it might be relevant, some of it's not relevant at all, some of it's helpful. So we have to sort of reorganize our brain and defrag our brain and think about what do we need to learn, what did we learn in the past that's still relevant, and what should we just relegate to memory, to past memory,
Yeah. Yeah.
or just do a brain dump and get rid of it. But it's hard to
Yeah.
do. I mean, getting rid of your memories, unless you have a mental disease, or
Right.
chronic illness, which is, I'm not making light of it,
Right.
but the reality is that we need to unlearn, and I think so. Resilience, unlearning, and team support and hope turned out to be really keys, and I think they're, even if people only worked on those four areas, that would be incredibly helpful and improve adaptability quotient.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess as the next thing I wanted to talk about briefly was just future of the workforce and things like that. But to me, it sounds like what you were just talking about with adaptability and resilience and all those other things is really the key to everything from automation and robots taking people's jobs to simply surviving in the post pandemic era. I mean, is that your thought as well? Is this idea of learning the right things, remembering the right things, maybe letting the robots do what they do best and they continue to improve or whatever? But what's that secret to basically remaining relevant in a career or in even a new career in this changing workforce?
Yeah, that's a great question, and let me unpack part of that. So
Yeah.
if we, I'll give people some peace of mind that the robots are not taking your job. I mean, they're not going to force you to be unemployed
Right.
unless you
Right.
don't change. So we go back to everything we just talked about for the last 20 minutes.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So you're going to need to adapt. You're going to need to learn. You're going to need to unlearn. You're going to have an open mind. You're going to have to do all these things, but you'll still have work. And in fact, the work will hopefully be more rewarding. It'll be more challenging, more rewarding, but there'll be jobs. And the rule of thumb, and this is purely rule of thumb, but it's based on large pieces of data, is that two-thirds of all jobs will be one-third automated. So I'll say that again:
Yeah.
two-thirds of all jobs will be one-third automated. Now, the so people could kind of have a sigh of relief, but that also means that work's going to be different, that people are going to have to understand how to apply the technology, or you
Yeah.
suggested the technology was going to replace some of the things that the employee or the worker did. But with that, they will now have more time to digest the data from the technology, or maybe they have to learn how to repair and maintain the technology. And because it's not some of it's physical, some of it's manual labor. Sometimes you got to crawl under your desks, you have to wire things, but
Right.
ultimately it's a lot of the work will be how do we, oh, the software is not working, and you have to use critical thinking skills to detect. What's wrong with it? Why isn't it doing that? So every 2/3 of all jobs are going to be 1/3 automated, which means 2/3 of the population of all the jobs that are out there will continue to be, but they're going to be more complex, and people are going to have to learn new skills how to do them. There's going to be a small percentage of jobs that are just done away with. They were fragile before. Going back to our term fragile, they were just on the brink of extinction for the last 20 or 30 years, and the pandemic probably just slammed the door on it. Put the last
Yeah.
nail in the coffin. So there are
Yeah.
going to be some new ones, but we're already seeing this. We're already seeing new jobs evolve, and it's happened in every revolution. We're entering the fourth industrial revolution. In every industrial revolution, there has always been more jobs created than there has been that have become extinct. And at least in our near lifetime, I don't know what's
Yeah.
going to happen in the later 21st century, but in our near lifetime, and for anybody who's probably in the workforce now, including Gen Z, even the 18 and 20-year-olds, there are going to be plenty of new jobs. It's remarkable some of the new jobs that have come up, like contract tracer. uh,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
this isn't the last pandemic. This isn't the last crisis we're going to have. We're going to have contact tracing. We're going to have, again, they're all going to be evolved on, dependent on technologies, but there's going to be a lot of new jobs we never even thought of the titles. We may have anti-Zoom bombers,
Right. Right. Yeah.
so many, but there's so many people popped up on how do you do a better virtual presentation? How do you teach online? How do we train online? How do you work better remotely? How do you become more efficient? So again, there's going to be a lot of new jobs. Here's an interesting fact too. Throughout the pandemics, obviously went through almost all of 2020, but the impact started in February or March of 2020. The amazing thing is that there was a 12% increase of new businesses in the first 9 months of 2020 compared to 2019. Think
Wow.
about that. We're in a
Yeah.
pandemic. All you read about is massive unemployment, GDP that collapsed by 33%, um, businesses that are going bankrupt and closed and dependent on PPP and other stimulus, and 12 there's a 12% increase in new businesses, and it's just not home-owned businesses. We're not talking about
Right.
uh,
Right.
we're talking about people who filed for employee ID numbers, which means they are going to employ people. Amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
don't hear that. So again, even through a pandemic, people are creating new opportunities and new businesses. I would certainly chalk them up to be in the high adaptable, have high
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
high AQ. But we need to spread that, and that's I didn't mention this. The AQAI, which is the company that I'm affiliated with, it's AQAI just as it says. It is our moonshot, our mission is to ensure that 100 million people are not left behind. And the
Yeah.
goal to do that was through improving their adaptability quotient.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I'm one of those people that started a business during the pandemic, so I'll count myself among them. So interesting
Congratulations. Good
times.
luck. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, interesting times to do that. So, I mean, I guess last question before we wrap up: do you see us going back to whatever normal was? I mean, do you see a return to normalcy, or are we simply going to keep evolving based on where we are? What's your prediction there?
Yeah, I will say with almost full certainty that we're not going back to normal. We never have, we never will, and
Yeah,
there's too much that's changed. And again, normal depends on what people think of. If you happen to be fortunate enough to work in a job and your desire is to go back to an office, if that's normal, yeah, that'll happen for some people.
right,
But when you get back to the office, it's not going to be normal. The same people aren't going to be there. Work's going to be done differently. There are still going to be people working remotely. Travel won't be the same. You're not going to have the same type of visits, whether we go back to having large conferences, business conferences. That's all going to change. So again, there's going to we're not going back to the way it was. We'll go back. So I mentioned this
yeah,
earlier that I struggle with the terms like new normal, normal 2.0, new wave of normal. One of my friends calls it future next. Uh,
Yeah.
one of the things that I believe the best way to look at it is we're going to have waves of normal, and it's like being at the beach in large crashing waves. The wave comes in, and that's normal for now, and then behind it there's another wave, and now we have another normal. And again, it doesn't mean it's going to happen to us. Well, that's going to be going on continuously in the background. Whether our lives are impacted immensely or significantly, each of those times the wave crashes remains to be seen. But over time, I don't think, we sort of had a 40-year normal period, or at least a
Yeah.
20-year normal period from the early since 9/11 through now. And, those, I think those stages or those phases of normal will become much shorter.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds right to me. Well, Ira, thanks for joining the show. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with what you're doing?
Well, you can easily just search Google, Ira, use my middle initial S, Wolf, Wolfe. You can visit my website. My company website is Success Performance Solution. You can learn a little bit about me there, or irawolf.com, and certainly connect with me on any social. LinkedIn is probably the best. I'm most active on there. And if you send me an invite to connect, I'll be happy to respond.
Wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Ira Wolfe, President and Chief Googlization Officer at Success Performance Solutions, for joining the show. And thanks for listening to the Agile World with Greg Kilstrom. See you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile World podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. I'm your host, Greg Kilstrom. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can learn more and get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, from my website at theagile.world.